for their gifts at the manger cradle in Bethlehem. But have you ever heard the story of the other wise man, who also saw the star in its rising and set out to follow it, yet did not arrive with his brethren in the presence of the young child Jesus? I would tell you the tale as I have heard fragments of it in the hall of dreams in the palace of the heart of man.
You'll grab your hymnals.
In the days when Augustus Caesar was master of many kings and Herod reigned in Jerusalem, there lived among the mountains of Persia a certain man named Artaban, the Median. He was a tall, dark man with brilliant eyes. His robe was pure white wool thrown over a tunic of white silk, and a white pointed cap rested on his flowing black hair. It was the dress of the ancient priesthood of the Magi. One December night he told his friends, "In the years that are long in the past, long before our fathers came into the land of Babylon, there were wise men in Chaldee, from whom the first of the Magi learned the secret of the heavens. Hear the words of prophecy. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall arise out of Israel." It was the Hebrew Daniel, the mighty searcher of dreams, the counselor of kings, a prophet of sure things and a reader of the thoughts of God, who wrote, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It has been shown to me and to my 3 companions among the Magi, Caspar, Melchior, and Belteshazzar, who are watching at the ancient temple in Babylon, that if the promised star appears, they will wait 10 days for me, and then we will set out together for Jerusalem to see and worship the one who shall be born King of Israel." I believe the sign will come. I have made ready for the journey. I have sold my house and my possessions and bought these 3 jewels, a sapphire, a ruby, and a pearl, to carry them as tribute to the king." While he was speaking, he thrust his hand to the inmost fold of his girdle and drew out 3 great gems, one blue as a fragment of the night sky, one redder than a ray of sunrise, and one as pure as the peak of a snow mountain at twilight, and laid them on the outspread linen scrolls before him. His friends thought he was foolish. Only one, the oldest and wisest, said, "It is better to follow even the shadow of the best than to remain content with the worst." And those who would see wonderful things must often be ready to travel alone. I am too old for this journey, but my heart shall be a companion of the pilgrimage. Go in peace. So one by one they went out of the chamber, and Artaban was left in solitude. He gathered up the jewels and replaced them in his girdle. As Artaban watched the eastern sky that night, behold, an azure spark was born out of the darkness. Tiny and infinitely remote, yet perfect in every part, it pulsated in the enormous vault as if the 3 jewels had mingled and had been transformed into a living heart of light. He bowed his head. "It is the sign," he said. "The king is coming, and I will go to meet him." All night long, Vasda, the swiftest of Artaban's horses, had been waiting, saddled and bridled, in her stall, pawing the ground impatiently and shaking her bit as if she shared the eagerness of her master's purpose, though she knew not its meaning. Before the birds had fully roused to their strong, high, joyful chant of morning song, the other wise man was in the saddle, riding swiftly along the high road. How close, how intimate is the comradeship between a man and his favorite horse on a long journey. It is a silent, comprehensive friendship, an intercourse beyond the need of words. They drank at the same wayward springs and sleep under the same guardian stars. Artaban must indeed ride wisely and well if he would keep the appointed hour with the other magi, for the route was 150 parasangs, and 15 was the utmost that he could travel in a day. At nightfall on the 10th day, Artaban was only 3 hours away from the temple where he was to meet his friends. Suddenly his horse stood stock still, quivering in every muscle before a dark object in the shadow of the last palm tree. Artaban dismounted. The dim starlight revealed the form of a man lying across the road. A long, faint, ghostly sigh came from the man's lips. Artaban's heart leaped into his throat. How could he stay here in the darkness to minister to a dying stranger? What claim had this unknown fragment of human life upon his compassion or his service? If he lingered but for an hour, he could hardly reach Bersippa at the appointed time. His companions would think he had given up the journey. They would go without him, and he would lose his quest. But if he went on now, the man would surely die. If he stayed, life might be restored. His spirit throbbed and fluttered with the urgency of the crisis. Should he risk the great reward of his divine faith for the sake of a single deed of human love? God of truth and purity, he prayed, direct me in the holy path, the way of wisdom which thou only knowest. He carried the man to a little mound at the foot of the palm tree. He brought water from one of the small canals nearby and moistened the sufferer's brow and mouth. He mingled a draught of one of those simple but potent remedies which he carried always in his girdle, for the Magians were physicians as well as astrologers, and poured it slowly between the colorless lips. Hour after hour he labored as only a skillful healer of disease can do, and at last the man's strength returned. He sat up and looked about him. "Who art thou?" he said. "I am Artaban the Magian, and I am going to Jerusalem in search of the one who is to be born King of the Jews, a great prince and deliverer of all men. I dare not delay any longer upon my journey, for the caravan that has waited for me may depart without me. But see, here is all that I have left of bread and wine, and here is a potion of healing herbs. When thy strength is restored, thou canst find the dwellings of the Hebrews among the houses of Babylon." The Jew raised his trembling hand solemnly to heaven. "Now may the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob bless and prosper the journey of the merciful, and bring him in peace to his desired haven. I have nothing to give thee in return, only this, that I can tell you where the Messiah must be sought. For our prophets have said that he should be born not in Jerusalem, but in Bethlehem of Judah. May the Lord bring thee in safety to that place, because thou hast had pity upon the sick." It was already long past midnight, and Artaban rode in haste, And Vasta, restored by the rest, ran eagerly through the silent plain and swam the channels of the river. She put forth the remnant of her strength and fled over the ground like a gazelle. When Artaban reached the temple of the 7 spears, he could discern no trace of his friends. There was no sign of the caravan of the wise men, far or near. At the edge of the terrace, he saw a small broken brick, and under it was a piece of parchment. He caught it up and read, "We have waited past the midnight and can delay no longer. We go to find the king. Follow us across the desert." Artaban sat down upon the ground and covered his head in despair. "How can I cross the desert," said he, "with no food and with a spent horse? I must return to Babylon, sell my sapphire, and buy a train of camels and provisions for the journey. I may never overtake my friends. Only God the merciful knows whether I shall not lose the sight of the king because I tarried to show mercy." There was a silence in the Hall of Dreams where I was listening to the story of the other wise man, and through this silence I saw, but very dimly, his figure passing over the dreary undulations of the desert, high up on the back of his camel, rocking steadily onward like a ship over the waves. The land of death spread its cruel net around him. The stony waste bore no fruit but briars and thorns. Arid and inhospitable mountain ranges rose before him. Shifting hills of treacherous sand were heaped like tombs along the horizon. Through heat and nighttime cold, the Magian moved steadily onward. Then I saw the gardens and orchards of Damascus, the long snowy ridge of Hermon, and the dark groves of cedars in the valley of the Jordan, the blue waters of the lake of Galilee, and the fertile plain of Esdraelon, and the hills of Ephraim, and the highlands of Judah. Through all these I followed the figure of Artaban moving steadily onward until he arrived in Bethlehem. And it was the third day after the 3 wise men had come to that place and had found Mary and Joseph with the young child Jesus, and had laid their gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh at his feet. Then the other wise man drew near, weary but full of hope, bearing his ruby and his pearl to offer to the king. For now at last, he said, I shall surely find him, though it be alone, and later than my brethren. This is the place of which the Hebrew exile told me that the prophets had spoken, and here I shall behold the rising of the great light. But I must inquire about the visit of my brethren, and to what house the star directed them, and to whom they presented their tribute. The streets of the village seemed to be deserted. From the open door of a lone stone cottage, he heard the sound of a woman's voice singing softly. He entered and found a young mother hushing her baby to rest. She told him of the strangers from the far east who had appeared in the village 3 days ago, and how they said that a star had guided them to the place where Joseph of Nazareth was lodging with his wife and her newborn child, and how they had paid reverence to the child and given him many rich gifts. But the travelers disappeared again as suddenly as they had come. We were afraid at the strangeness of their visit, she said. We could not understand it. The man of Nazareth took the babe and his mother and fled away that same night secretly, and it was whispered that they were going far away to Egypt. Ever since, there has been a spell upon the village. They say that the Roman soldiers are coming from Jerusalem. Artaban listened to her gentle, timid speech, and the child in her arms looked up in his face and smiled, stretching out its rosy hands to grasp at the winged circle of gold on his breast. His heart warmed to the touch. It seemed like a greeting of love and trust to one who had journeyed long in loneliness and perplexity, fighting with his own doubts and fears, and following a light that was veiled in clouds. Might not this child have been the promised prince, he asked within himself as he touched his soft cheek. Kings have been born ere now in lowlier houses than this, and the favorite of the stars may rise even from a cottage. The one whom I seek has gone before me, and now I must follow the king to Egypt. Suddenly there came the noise of a wild confusion and uproar in the streets of the village, a shrieking and wailing of women's voices, a clanging of brazen trumpets and clashing of swords, and a desperate cry, the soldiers of Herod, they are killing our children. The young mother's face grew white with terror. She clasped her child to her bosom and crouched motionless in the dark corner of the room, covering him with the folds of her robe, lest he should wake and cry. But Artaban went quickly and stood in the doorway of the house. His broad shoulders filled the portal from side to side. The soldiers came hurrying down the street with bloody hands and dripping swords. At the sight of the stranger in his imposing dress, they hesitated with surprise. The captain of the band approached the threshold to thrust him aside, but Artaban did not stir. His face was as calm as though he were watching the stars. He said in a low voice, I am all alone in this place, and I am waiting to give this jewel to the prudent captain who will leave me in peace. He showed the ruby glistening in the hollow of his hand like a great drop of blood. The captain was amazed at the splendor of the gem. The pupils of his eyes expanded with desire, and the hard lines of greed wrinkled around his lips. He stretched out his hand and took the ruby. March on, he cried to his men. There is no child here. The house is still. The clamor and the clang of arms passed down the street. Artaban turned his face to the east and prayed, God of truth, forgive me. I have said the thing that is not to save the life of a child, and 2 of my gifts are gone. I have spent for man that which was meant for God. Shall I ever be worthy to see the face of the king? The woman, weeping for joy, said very gently, Because thou hast saved the life of my little one, may the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Then again there was a silence in the Hall of Dreams, and I understood that the years of Artaban were flowing very swiftly. I caught only a glimpse here and there of the river of his life shining through the shadows that concealed its course. I saw him moving among the throngs of men in populous Egypt, seeking everywhere for traces of the household that had come down from Bethlehem, and finding them, traces so faint and dim that they vanished before him continually. And then I saw him again in an obscure house of Alexandria, taking counsel with a Hebrew rabbi, bending over the rolls of parchment on which the prophecies of Israel were written, reading aloud the pathetic words which foretold the sufferings of the promised Messiah, the despised and rejected of men, the man of sorrows and the acquaintance of grief. And remember, my son, said he, fixing his deep-set eyes upon the face of Artaban, the king whom you are seeking is not to be found in a palace, nor among the rich and powerful. If the light of the world and the glory of Israel had been appointed to come with the greatness of earthly splendor, it must have appeared long ago. For no son of Abraham will ever again rival the power which Joseph had in the palaces of Egypt, or the magnificence of Solomon throned between the lions of Jerusalem. But the light for which the world is waiting is a new light, the glory that shall rise out of patient and triumphant suffering. And the kingdom which is to be established forever is a new kingdom, the royalty of perfect and unconquerable love. I do not know how this shall come to pass, nor how the turbulent kings and peoples of earth shall be brought to acknowledge the Messiah and pay homage to him. But this I know, those who seek him will do well to look among the poor and the lowly, the sorrowful and the oppressed. So I saw the other wise man again and again, traveling from place to place, searching among the people of the dispersion, with whom the little family from Bethlehem might perhaps have found a refuge. In all this world of anguish, though he found none to worship, he found many to help. He fed the hungry, he clothed the naked, and he healed the sick. He comforted the captives, and his years went by more swiftly than the weaver's shuttle. It seemed almost as if he had forgotten his quest. But once I saw him for a moment as he stood alone at sunrise, waiting at the gate of a Roman prison. He had taken from a secret resting place in his bosom the pearl, the last of his jewels. As he looked at it, a mellower luster, a soft and iridescent light trembled upon its surface. It seemed to absorb some reflection of the colors of the lost sapphire and ruby. So the profound, secret purpose of a noble life draws into itself the memories of past joy and past sorrow. Then at last, while I was thinking of this pearl and of its meaning, I heard the end of the story of the other wise man. 3 years of the life of Artaban had passed away, and he was still a pilgrim and a seeker after light. His hair was now white as the wintry snow, worn and weary and ready to die, but still looking for the king. He had come for the last time to Jerusalem. It seemed as if he must make one more effort, and something whispered in his heart that at last he might succeed. It was the season of the Passover. The city was thronged with strangers. The children of Israel, scattered in far lands all over the world, had returned to the temple for the great feast. There was a singular agitation visible in the multitude. The sky was veiled with a portentous gloom, and currents of excitement flashed through the crowd. The clatter of sandals and the soft, thick sound of thousands of bare feet shuffling over the stone flowed unceasingly along the street that leads to the Damascus gate. Artaban joined company with a group of people from his own country, Parthian Jews who had come up to keep the Passover, and inquired of them the cause of the tumult and where they were going. "We are going," they answered, "to the place called Golgotha, outside the city walls, where there is to be an execution. Have you not heard what has happened? 2 famous robbers are to be crucified, and with them another, called Jesus of Nazareth, a man who has done many wonderful works among the people, so that they love him greatly. But the priests and the elders have said that he must die, because he gave himself out to be the Son of God. And Pilate has sent him to the cross, because he said that he was the King of the Jews." How strangely these familiar words fell upon the tired heart of Artaban. They had led him for a lifetime over land and sea, and now they came to him darkly and mysteriously like a message of despair. The king had arisen, but he had been denied and cast out. He was about to perish. Perhaps he was already dying. Could it be the same who had been born in Bethlehem 33 years ago, at whose birth the star had appeared in heaven, and of whose coming the prophets had spoken? Artaban's heart beat unsteadily, and he said within himself, "The ways of God are stranger than the thoughts of men, and it may be that I shall find the king at last in the hands of his enemies, and shall come in time to offer my pearl for his ransom before he dies." So the old man followed the multitude with slow and painful steps. Just then a troop of soldiers came down the street, dragging a young girl. She broke suddenly from her tormentors and threw herself at Artaban's feet. "Have pity on me," she cried, "and save me. I also am a daughter of the true religion which is taught by the Magi. My father was a merchant of Parthia, but he is dead, and I am seized for his debts to be sold as a slave. Save me from worse than death." Artaban trembled. It was the old conflict in his soul which had come to him in the palm grove of Babylon and in the cottage at Bethlehem, the conflict between the expectation of faith and the impulse of love. Twice the gift which he had consecrated to the worship of religion had been drawn from his hand to the service of humanity. This was the third trial, the ultimate probation, the final and irrevocable choice. Was it his great opportunity or his last temptation? He could not tell. One thing only was clear in his mind: it was inevitable. And does not the inevitable come from God? One thing only was sure to his heart: to rescue this helpless girl would be a true deed of love. And is not love the light of the soul? He took the pearl from his bosom. Never had it seemed so luminous, so radiant, so full of tender living luster. He laid it in the hand of the girl. "This is thy ransom. It is the last of my treasures which I kept for the king." While he spoke, the darkness of the sky thickened, the shuddering tremors ran through the earth, heaving convulsively. The walls of the houses rocked to and fro. Stones were loosened and crashed into the street. Dust clouds filled the air. The soldiers fled in terror. But Artaban and the girl whom he had ransomed crouched helpless beneath the wall of the praetorium. What had he to fear? What had he to live for? He had given away the last remnant of his tribute for the king. He had parted with the last hope of finding him. The quest was over, and it had failed. But even in that thought, accepted and embraced, there was peace. It was not resignation. It was not submission. It was something more profound and searching. He knew that all was well because he had done the best that he could from day to day. He had been true to the light that had been given to him. He had not seen the revelation of life everlasting, incorruptible, and immortal, but he knew that even if he could live his earthly life over again, it could not be otherwise than it had been. One more lingering pulsation of the earthquake quivered through the ground. A heavy tile, shaken from the roof, fell and struck the old man on the temple. He lay breathless and pale, with his snowy white head resting on the young girl's shoulder and the blood trickling from the wound. As she bent over him, fearing that he was dead, there came a voice through the twilight, very small and still, like music sounding from a distance, in which the notes are clear, but the words are lost. The girl turned to see if someone had spoken from the window above them, but she saw no one. Then the old man's lips began to move as if in answer, and she heard him say, "Not so, my lord. For when saw I thee hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw I thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? When saw I thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? 33 years have I looked for thee, but I have never seen thy face, nor ministered to thee, my king." He ceased, and the sweet voice came again. And again the girl heard it, very faint and far away. But now it seemed as though she understood the words. "Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto me, and to one of the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me." A calm radiance of wonder and joy lighted the pale face of Artaban like the first ray of dawn on a snowy mountain peak. One long last breath of relief exhaled through his lips. His journey was ended. His treasures were accepted. The other wise man had found the king.